Hi, this is Remembering the Past with Corey Franklin, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start out with our feature, Mikhail Kalashnikov, and Kalashnikov died recently at the age of 94. He was the Russian army officer who designed probably the world's most famous and widely used gun, the AK-47. Here's an Al Jazeera report on the AK-47 and Mikhail Kalashnikov.
It's 1947, the very beginning of the Cold War, and rolling off the production line at the Soviet armaments factory, a new weapon, a weapon that will change the face of war. The AK-47, taking its name from that of its inventor, 28-year-old Mikhail Kalashnikov. A former tank officer, he was wounded in the war, and while recovering in hospital, listened to soldiers complaining about the lack of a reliable infantry weapon. Rugged and reliable, the AK-47 can fire 600 rounds a minute. Lethal at ranges of more than a kilometer, it's estimated that there are more than 100 million of the weapons worldwide, produced in 14 countries, with 82 armies equipping their troops with the AK. Russia supplied millions of the weapons to its surrogate forces during the Cold War, and they're still in use. It is a remarkably simple weapon to use. It only has 8 moving parts. You could easily teach a child how to strip and shoot an AK-47 in under an hour. For the child armies of Africa, in Sierra Leone, Liberia and Uganda, the AK-47 was the youngsters' weapon of choice, turning 10-year-olds into killers. The AK was also favored by drug dealers and drug cartels, a weapon that became an icon for violence in the 20th century. 4 years ago, the Russian leadership celebrated Mikhail Kalashnikov's 90th birthday, awarding him the nation's highest honor, Hero of the Russian Federation. But looking back on his life, Kalashnikov himself had some regrets. I'm proud of my invention, but I'm sad that it's used by terrorists. I would have preferred to have invented a machine people and farmers could use, like a lawnmower. Peter Sharp, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
Here's a brief Russian documentary on Mikhail Kalashnikov.
Self-taught gunsmith Mikhail Kalashnikov came up with the prototype for his celebrated rifle at the age of 22. He set about designing it after he was wounded in action during the Second World War. Recognition of his achievement came 5.5 years later in 1947, when his model came first in a Defense Ministry firearm design contest. The new weapon was designated AK-47.
I took care to think over every single part to make them more technologically suitable for mass production. At the same time, I needed to make sure that the gun was as reliable and durable as its design dictates. That was not an easy task. In general, any designer must be very careful with regard to every detail of the design.
The rival to the AK-47 has always been the American-made M16. The AK-47 is used in most of the Eastern Hemisphere, and the M16 is used in most of the Western Hemisphere. The M16 got some bad publicity during the Vietnam War. It didn't always operate reliably in the wet, muddy conditions of the Southeast Asian jungles. The AK-47 had a much better reputation. The famed gunnery sergeant from Full Metal Jacket, Lee Ermey, once tested the weapons against each other, and here was his conclusion.
I don't need to spell it out for you knuckleheads out there. In my book, the M16 is the better rifle. You can count on that.
Well, I don't know if all those terrorists and drug dealers out there are going to buy Lee Ermey's conclusion. And Kalashnikov's AK-47 is probably going to remain the world's most popular weapon for a long time. We're going to move on now to Edgar Bronfman, who died recently at the age of 84. Edgar Bronfman was the head of the Seagram's liquor company. The company made a whole bunch of money during Prohibition, running liquor from Canada to the United States. And then when Prohibition ended, they became the largest liquor company in the world, run by the Bronfman family. Edgar Bronfman was also notable because he was a fierce defender of worldwide Judaism and was extremely instrumental in outing Nazi war criminals who escaped after the war. Here's a Canadian Broadcasting Company report on Edgar Bronfman.
Edgar Bronfman Sr. certainly had his share of headlines over the decades. One of Canada's best-known billionaires died this weekend at the age of 84. Paul Hunter reflects on the life of a man known as a liquor magnate, a philanthropist, and a tireless campaigner for Jewish rights.
When the Seagram's building in New York was built in the 1950s, it was and remains an architectural jewel. befitting the wealth and splendor behind the corporate name. After all, in its heyday, Seagram's effectively ruled the world when it came to liquor. Of all such drinks served in America, there was a time when 1 in 3 was a Seagram's product. Montreal-born Edgar Bronfman, who died Saturday, took over Seagram's from his father Sam in '57. Sam was famous for his presumed dealings with bootleggers, selling Canadian whiskey in Prohibition time in America. But under Edgar, Seagram's would grow beyond liquor and into fruit juices, the oil industry, and chemicals. A jet-set life of money and mansions. In the 1970s, Edgar Bronfman's high life came with a family nightmare to match.
Why'd you do it?
Kidnappers had grabbed one of his sons. Edgar personally delivered a huge ransom before they were caught. The son, unharmed. But it was his time as president of the World Jewish Congress for which Edgar Bronfman will be remembered outside business circles. He pushed the Soviet Union to allow Jews to emigrate. He pressed to expose the Nazi past of former UN leader Kurt Waldheim, and for Swiss banks to make amends for profiting off the Holocaust. The Swiss government eventually proposed a huge fund for Holocaust victims.
It says that a long battle is more or less over, that truth and justice seem to have won, which I find wonderful.
Bronfman was also a devout philanthropist. He gave generously to Jewish teaching and social programs. In 1999, then long since having taken out U.S. citizenship, Bronfman was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States. Said the World Jewish Congress on learning of his death, many Jews around the world are better off today because of him. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
Well, we're going to move from Canada to Baltimore now, and Paul Blair, who died recently at the age of 69. And Paul Blair was the great center fielder of the Baltimore Orioles during their heyday in the 1960s and 1970s. He went on to play with the Yankees also. And he was probably the greatest defensive center fielder of our era. Boy, that guy could pick it in center field, let me tell you. He tended to play shallow, but he had great instincts, and he always got a great jump on the ball. Earl Weaver said he never saw him make a hard catch because he was always under the ball, and he made the Baltimore pitching staffs better and helped them win a couple of World Series along with guys like Brooks Robinson and Mark Belanger. He won't make it to the Hall of Fame, but he might have made it to the Hall of Fame if he'd been a little better hitter, and he actually started out his career as a very good hitter. He won a World Series game with a home run in 1966, but he was beamed in 1970 and was never the same hitter after that. But he was such a good defensive player that he was always in the lineup for very, very good teams. Here he talks about the importance of defense in baseball.
During my era, you get hit, but if you play great defense, you still had a chance to get to the big leagues because that was part of winning. You can't win consistently without defense. You just can't. Only thing that can be consistent every single day is defense. Nobody's going to hit every day. Nobody. Most anybody's hit is 56 in a row, and that probably never be done again. But you can play defense for 162 games. Nowadays, it's who can outslug who is not who outplays who anymore. And that's the way the game is going.
Here's a little bit of Paul Blair in the 1966 World Series against Sandy Koufax, where Sandy was undone by the defense of his center fielder, Willie Davis.
Sandy's control has been amazing, with 25 strikes out of 28 pitches. Koufax gets set to pitch with 1 out. Paul Blair lifts a fly to center. Willie Davis moves under it, but he's lost it in the sun. The ball falls behind him. He retrieves it quickly, but Blair reaches second, and Powell goes to third.
Well, Paul Blair won a lot of games for the Orioles on defense, and he was a gregarious guy, and he liked to talk to reporters, and he loved fans, and here are a couple of his other thoughts.
When I got to the big leagues, I was taught, first you had to be fan-friendly, period, because they paid for our jobs. If the fans don't want to come see it, we don't have a job. So you go out there and you be cordial to the fans. Personally, I loved every minute I was in the big leagues. There was nothing bad about the big leagues. Today's players, they act like it's a crime to have to sign an autograph. It's just totally unreal. I mean, after every ball game, I would sit in my car and sign an autograph till the last kid was gone. I didn't care how many were. That was my obligation to them for coming to the game and watching me important us as the Baltimore Orioles.
The idea of playing all those years with the same team, too.
But that's not going to happen now, because now it's more about how much money I can make, not how many world championships I can win.
Back then,
That's terrible.
I got to tell you, Paul Blair, great player and a great guy. They don't make him like him anymore. We're going to close tonight with Andy Granatelli, who died at the age of 90. And Andy Granatelli was a fixture at the Indianapolis 500 for years. He was a car owner and entrepreneur, and he was the head of STP, Scientifically Treated Petroleum. His early cars had the Novi engine, which had this big scream to it, and they generally didn't win. He didn't win until 1969 when Mario Andretti won for him in a car he owned. But as I said, he was ubiquitous at the racetrack and on television for years. Here's a report on Andy Granatelli.
Andy Granatelli. They call me Mr. 500.
Granatelli, a very domineering individual, great innovator. Coming up with the Novi.
Jim Hurtubise and the famous Novi supercharged V8. Proven the most powerful cars at the Speedway, the Novis have thrilled the fans for many years.
The Novi had a huge cult following. People would come out to see the Novis. But year after year, they'd sit on the pole, they'd brag track records, lead the race, but something would always happen.
The world knew Bobby Hunter was a race driver all of a sudden, all because I drove the Novi and Andy Granatelli.
Andy was a promoter. Look at the time the whole crew had looked like pajamas on, with the STP. They were white with the STP stickers on, how could you miss that?
That STP pajama thing is the best thing that ever happened to STP or the Speedway. To this day, makes covers in magazines. And you're talking about it now, you're 40 years later.
He, with STP, created a lot of great interest at the Indianapolis Speedway with the Novi and his promotions with STP.
I would go to a racetrack, all racetracks, including Indianapolis, and I would advertise with my budget, STP budget, come and see the Indianapolis 500 on May 31st at 500 at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. See so and so and so, see my turbine car, see this or see that, or see this car or that car.
Through the main straightaway and down to the checkered flag. Mario Andretti has just fulfilled a lifelong ambition for Andy Granatelli. He's dreamed of winning the 500 for 23 years.
I'm glad that I was the one to give him his first victory. He definitely deserved that, and he gets a little bit emotional, obviously.
When Mario pulled in, I was elated. I grabbed the poor guy, pulled him up to me, and I told him in his ear, tell him you got more STP in your car than the other guys. My sales jumped $7 million on those words. And of course, I kissed him at the same time.
For the first time in history, the winning driver has been kissed first, not by the beauty queen, but by the winning owner.
Andy Granatelli is a true icon in Indianapolis, being a marketing genius. I think he brought something for other people to pursue as far as what is all important, also the marketing side of the sport.
Advertising I did always was different than everybody else. Gordon Van Leeuwen used to run the orange juice cars in Indianapolis, okay? Car owner. Somebody walked up to him once and says, why don't you get Andy to sell your orange juice? He said there's not enough orange trees. That says it all.
Some people thought that STP was nothing more than regular motor oil. I don't know enough about it, but they did have cool commercials. It was called the Racer's Edge.
STP, a big name in racing for nearly 20 years. STP oil treatment on the track in some of the world's most expensive engines. Around the track, around the world, every day, tens of thousands of people get STP oil treatment. Get it for your car. Satisfaction guaranteed. Around the track, around the world, STP oil treatment is #1.
Sure sounds like it works. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps. Closing on Andy Granatelli, we've got to go to the only rock group we could go to, the Car Experts. And who else? The Beach Boys. We'll play a little bit of the only song I know of that mentions the Indy 500 and its lyrics. Fun, fun, fun. About the girl who appropriates her father's T-Bird.
She makes the Indy 500 look like a momentary face. A lot of guys